Hi everyone, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm so excited to be finally doing my favorite books of 2024. I've already done my worst video, so I'm just so excited to talk about the books I actually really enjoyed and loved, and I'm just so excited to be able to gush. So without further ado, let's get into my favorite reads of the year. I say without further ado, we're gonna get started, but I'm actually gonna talk about some honorable mentions first. I didn't have a lot of books I really loved that are new favorites for me, unfortunately, but I am really excited to talk about those few that really stuck with me. But I also have a couple other books, again, that are honorable mentions that I loved, really enjoyed. They're high up in my feelings. They're just not quite like 5-star status, but I'm still so excited to talk about them and give them a little bit of an honorable mention. So for my first book, I have A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This is a Celtic-inspired fantasy novel, and we're following a bunch of different characters, but our main character is this young man who is returning to his home island after studying for a bard at this prestigious university. The island is wild and full of magic, and there's something mysterious going on with the young women of this island. They keep disappearing, and now that he's traveling back home, he's expected to be the one to solve it. I really enjoyed this. I'm so excited to read the next book. I'm really anticipating it. There were a couple stylistic choices that brought me out of the narrative. Mainly, I remember there being a little bit of head hopping that was not done well in my opinion, but overall this was like an immersive fantasy where I felt like the world and the story was really important, and it really drew the characters into being really compelling. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this. This is one of the few fantasy novels that I felt like really stood up. So this was like a 3.75, again, for those head hopping moments that I didn't think were successful, but it still is in my feelings, and I'm still really excited to read the next one. The next book I have is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I read this entire series pretty much back to back, and I was sucked into this fantasy world. Like I kind of alluded to, I didn't have the best luck with fantasy sometimes during this year. I really felt like I wanted a very immersive fantasy, that the world, the magic was really important, and just nothing was quite doing it for me. So characters are the thing that draw me into a novel. I need those characters to be fleshed out and real, but I'm starting to understand also that I do care about the world, I do care about the magic, and when it's kind of just a thin veneer over a story, it doesn't really do it for me. And so going into this novel with just desiring a world and magic to be fully explained, this just became the perfect thing for me in that moment. It's very much this character kind of yelling at you and explaining things. I just came into this book in exactly the right moment where I desired that so deeply, so that this series just really worked for me. The characters are kind of unlikable. You're either gonna like them or hate them, but I was just so excited to fall into this world. It's like a magical school setting where the magic is trying to like eat these kids alive, and they're just trying to survive. It unexpectedly just really worked for me and was really what I wanted in that moment. So I really enjoyed this series, and I gave it like a 4 stars overall. The next book I have is Most Ardently by Kay Poll-Novoa. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. It is a YA novel, and I just thought it was really expertly done. I really enjoyed this. So this is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, like I said, but our main character of Lizzie is actually a transgender man who goes by Oliver, and it's him kind of stumbling into the Pride and Prejudice story, falling in love with Mr. Darcy, of course, but again, it's a very different take because of this one little element that changed. And I just really enjoyed what this novel did, what it accomplished. I thought it was just really sweet and fun and just really enjoyable as a Pride and Prejudice retelling as a novel. And one of the things that I really liked is that it wasn't afraid to kind of go against the grain of the Pride and Prejudice retelling. I feel like sometimes Pride and Prejudice retellings kind of get stuck in a box, and they just really get stuck into that idea and really play into every single kind of expected beat. This played up like the expected beats well without being afraid again to do its own thing, and I just really appreciated that. It felt fresh and fun while also being something really familiar and lovely. And so for my last honorable mention, I have Terry Pratchett's Guards Guards, which is my first Terry Pratchett novel. I'm holding up The Weird Sisters, which is my current read because I haven't gotten Guards Guards yet, but I'm so excited to get it because I love collecting these editions specifically now. But if you don't know, Terry Pratchett was a satirical fantasy author, and his kind of like biggest works, most well-known works, is his Discworld series, which I think most of his novels fall into. And so Guards Guards is one of the places people recommend you start if you want to get into the Discworld series. There's kind of like mini series within the Discworld, and I loved Guards Guards so much. It was so much fun. Again, satirical like Terry Pratchett's other work, and it just plays into a lot of very familiar fantasy tropes and puts them on their head and kind of extends them and makes fun of them, but very lovingly so. It was just such a fun read. As a fantasy fan, it just felt really unexpected and fun, and I just loved all the characters. They felt so real and fleshed out and so charming. Everything was just so charming while also being just so thought-provoking as well. Like, there's a lot of moments of this book that just like really hit home to a lot of current political issue kind of things. Guards basically follows a young man who is entering into this city, and the city is kind of full of ruffians and no goods. The city watch are just like not good at their job, and there's not very many of them. And from there you kind of fall into the city watch and you start following these characters as they get sucked into this mystery of this dragon that keeps appearing over the town. And so it's very typical gotta slay the dragon kind of narrative, but again, it just flips everything on its head, and it's just so fun and so wonderfully done. I loved the characters. Again, the characters were so charming, but also the world felt real. It felt fleshed out. Ankh-Morpork felt like this place. And again, I've been looking for fantasy novels where the setting is important, where it feels real and fleshed out, and I felt like I really understood the city and the vibes of it, and I really loved it, and I'm so excited to get to read the Discworld now. And like I said, I'm reading this one right now, and I'm loving it just as much. So let's get into my favorite books of the year. So we're going to be going in order of least favorite to favorite. One of my favorite books of the year is going to be He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan. This is the second and concluding novel in the Radiant King series, I want to say it's called. The first book is She Who Became the Sun. This is about a young person who takes on their brother's fate. They join a monastery and kind of become one of these really important figures in this historical war setting. This takes place in ancient China, and from there they are getting wrapped into these political intrigues, these army movements, and we don't just follow our main character of Zhu, we follow a couple different characters, and I love these intersecting characters and how they parallel each other, and it becomes even more prevalent in this novel. All of them kind of fall out of the traditional gender binary. All of them are kind of pushing against what society expects of them, and they're all just like morally gray and not great people, but just so interesting to follow. This is mostly historical fiction, but it does have that dash of fantasy that really pulls everything together. It might be even better than the first one, just because again you have those characters that are paralleling each other and like coming together and intersecting and fighting against each other, and it is just so expertly done. This is lower on the list for me just because I don't think about it as often, but when I do think about it, I just remember like, yeah, this book was really good. This series was really good. The next book I have is Apostate of Mercy by Lindsay Ellis. This is a sci-fi series, and the first book starts out being a very kind of more typical, almost 90s, early 2000s movie-esque first contact alien encounter story, which is kind of fun because the novel does take place in the early to mid 2000s, but from there it just becomes more and more complex as the books go on, as the characters start to take on the psychological toll of what they're dealing with, especially with our main character of Cora, as she is interacting with and being like the translator for this alien species. Like I said, the first book was like fun and action-packed. The second book was like very harrowing, just so good, and this book kind of gave us a little bit of both of those elements. It has more of the action-packedness of the first one while also still having a lot of the like questions about humanity and psychological torment that the characters are going through. I really like this sci-fi series. I think it's just expertly done, and I'm so excited to continue on with this series. I really do love it. I feel like the second book is still my favorite, but this was also really good and just did what I like in a sci-fi. The next book I have is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This is the first in a new fantasy series, adult fantasy series by Chakraborty. I have not read her original series. This was my first book of hers, and I'm so excited to read what she has to come out next. I'm so excited to read her previous series. I really loved this. This takes place in the ancient world of like early pirates around the Middle East, around like the Indian Ocean, Arabian Peninsula kind of area, and our main character, Amina, is recounting her stories of life as a pirate, of her taking on this one last job, and how that job kind of spirals out of control and becomes so much more than she can imagine. It's her rounding up her crew together, it's her meeting old faces and getting into trouble, and it is just so well done. Like I said, I was really craving fantasy that the world felt real and fleshed out, that it felt like it had care into it, and this book definitely did that. Just Chakraborty does say in like the back where she like like kind of took liberties, and like I guess there were liberties taken, but it still feels real. It still feels like a real place. It feels like those adventure stories that were very popular at the onset of novels, while also being like very easy and contemporary and fun. Like I wanted a pirate novel and I got that, as well as having like just very charming, interesting characters and this interesting world that felt so detailed and real. I'm just in love with this book and I can't wait to read the rest of the series and to read more of her work, because I just love how she sets up settings and how her characters just play into those settings and become like real fleshed out people with like very real, interesting, morally gray lives. It's definitely the kind of book I'm looking for when I'm picking up a fantasy adventure novel. The next book I have is The Deep Sky by Yume Kitase. This is a science fiction standalone adult novel, and in this novel we are following a young woman who is on this space expedition as kind of a extra person. She doesn't really have much to do, whereas everybody else has all these jobs to do, but she is on this space mission that is leaving a very disaster-filled Earth, basically an Earth at the beginning of an apocalypse almost, and this is kind of one last hope for humanity, but it also follows the story of her as a young girl and her relationship with her mother and how she got onto this crew and the kind of struggle there, and just everything was so expertly done and woven together. I loved the interweaving timeline and how all that came together, and the questions of humanity this talked about. I just loved this novel so much. It was so expertly done. It has a little bit of the psychological horror, it has a little bit of the thriller mystery aspect, it has the sci-fi elements as well. Just genre fiction blended so beautifully with like literary elements. It has everything that I want when I'm looking for like a literary sci-fi novel. It was so expertly crafted. So the next novel I have is Night at the Telegraph Club. As you can see, it has many accolades and a lot of people really enjoyed this, and I'm just one of the many. This is a historical fiction, contemporary, slice of life almost novel, and it's following this young woman named Lily in Cold War San Francisco, so around the 1950s, and that is really important because the Red Scare is kind of prominent element of this novel. But Lily is just figuring herself out. She's realizing that she is queer, and she's finding the lesbian queer bar scene at the same time. I just love how the historical elements were interwoven with this story. It really felt like a beautiful snapshot of this person's life, like just the onset of a really important moment. That's what I want from like a contemporary coming of age story. Not necessarily the most important moment in someone's life, but a moment of great change and kind of just a very beautiful vignette of like a very important moment. And yeah, this was just so expertly crafted, so well done. I want to read more of this author's work. Can't recommend it enough. It was so well done. Getting into the last three favorites, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Haikyuu. I read the entirety of this manga series this year in anticipation for the movie that came out this year. If you don't know, Haikyuu is a sports anime and a sports manga first, and it is following the sport of volleyball. We are following this underdog team as these two new freshmen join. We have Hinata, who is our main character, who is very much an underdog, has not had a real team before, has not really had real practices, and is really just new and fresh to volleyball, but has a lot of skill and talent and dedication to the sport. And then we have Kageyama, who has had a really difficult time dealing with teammates, but he knows he is one of the best and will stop at nothing to become the best of the best in the future. And it's them kind of being in this antagonistic relationship dynamic, along with like the relationship between all the new teammates and kind of figuring out that. And as we get farther and farther into the story, we learn about the other teams and how they're working together, how they're playing, and it's just such a fun series. It's so perfectly crafted. It just really reminds me how much I love a good manga series. And in terms of sports anime, this is probably the best sports anime, or very, very close to it for me. It just combines all the elements that I love and want in a sports anime. It has like the technical aspects, so I really feel like I'm learning and understanding the sport and understanding when these characters have these big moments of achievement. It's funny and cathartic and just has great character development and emotional development. It's just so well done. I cannot recommend Haikyuu enough. Start with the anime and you will soon be falling in love with the entire series. For my number 2 slot, I have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a retelling of Dracula. It's a little bit literary, a little bit of horror, just very beautiful and gothic. It's told in these letters much like the original Dracula novel, but again, it is told from one of the wives' perspectives to Dracula. Basically, it's her explaining why she had to kill her husband, and it's just so well done, so beautiful. I just really loved this book. I ended up going back and reading Dracula, which I also really enjoyed, and yeah, this is the kind of vampire story I want. This was so well done and just I was anticipating reading this book for so long, so finally reading it and having it be as satisfying as I wanted it to be was just the cherry on top. And then for my final read, I have Chain Gang All-Stars. This ended up being my favorite book of the year. This is a speculative literary fiction novel wherein we are in a very close to our reality future. Basically, prisoners on death row have the option now to join the Chain Gang, which is a competitive fighting ring that is televised, but these matches are matches to the death, so nobody has ever made it out of the sentencing of being on the Chain Gang. That is until our two main characters come around. They are very, very close to making it out. We have Loretta Thurwar, then Hurricane Stax. They are on the same Chain Gang. They are lovers, and they are very, very close to making it out alive. But of course, things become much more complicated. I just loved the craft of this novel, the interweaving of real life stuff that is happening in our world, mixed with like these speculative elements, just these different perspectives and what they bring and how they're viewing everything that's going on. Everything was just so expertly done. And these two women at the center of the story, they were so interesting and so important to the text. I love this novel so, so much. It is definitely my favorite novel of the year and definitely one of my favorite novels overall. I look for very specific kind of feeling in the speculative fiction world, and this just ticked off all my boxes. It did everything that I like in speculative fiction. Yeah, this was just so good. It was just so good. But yes, those were all of my favorite books of 2024. Let me know what your favorite book of the year was. I just really feel like I've found my taste, what I want. Like, I care about those characters. I want those characters to be in the story, to be fleshed out and important. But I want a world, too, that feels important to the novel, that feels fleshed out. And I want genre fiction with some literary elements. I know I really want that now. That's something that I just love. When it's expertly crafted and done, it just makes the novel just so much more compelling and delicious to read. And I'm hoping to read more of that in the future into the next year. But thank you so much for watching. Again, let me know what your favorite book of the year was. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.